This is Tappan or Tappan, New York, if you prefer, about 30 miles north of Manhattan Island. Tappan is a hamlet less than 3 square miles in size, and it's on the west side of the Hudson River. Or if you're looking at a map, that's the left side of the Hudson. As you can see from the pictures, it's a beautiful historic town still today. In late September, early October of 1780, an event took place here in Tappan that started out as a diplomatic issue, escalated to a military trial, and the execution of a British officer. Oh, and did I forget to say, it was also a part of the greatest treason of the American Revolution. This is an incredible American history story. I know you're going to enjoy it. So let's get started. Our story starts on the southern tip of Manhattan Island, the location of the British command during the Revolutionary War. In command in 1780 is General Sir Henry Clinton and his adjutant general, Major John André. André, by the way, was the youngest adjutant in history to that point, so young when he was appointed, just 28 years old, that Sir Henry had to receive special permission to place him in the position. So what makes André so, important? André is an incredibly intelligent and talented man. Born in London, attended Swiss boarding schools, spoke 4 languages fluently, and excelled in math, logic, and engineering. But André's true love was the fine arts. He was a great artist himself, and let's look at some of his sketches as I speak. Here are some of André's sketches that he made over time while he was in America. He also wrote poetry, which was published in the Philadelphia and New York newspapers. He wrote plays, he acted, he designed costumes, and he also was the architect of the biggest party on the North American continent until George Washington's inauguration. It was held in 1778. It was called the Meschianza. It was held in Philadelphia, and I'm going to do a totally independent video about that because that in itself is a mind-boggling story. So now I don't mean to make André seem, shallow or just a guy interested in socializing and social life. He was a very serious officer, very well respected, very smart and capable. He also was the director of military intelligence for Sir Henry. In that position, André ran a ring of spies that operated for England during the Revolutionary War. And at the end of 1779, he began receiving letters from someone very high up in the American command. Wondering who it could be, he was getting information that only someone very close to General Washington would know. And by early 1780, he realized that his correspondent was General Benedict Arnold. So I bet you can guess kind of where this story is going. So Benedict Arnold at this time is completely disillusioned with the American Revolution. To know more about how Benedict Arnold got to that place, after having first been probably our greatest general and field commander earlier in the war, I recommend you check out the documentary on Amazon Prime, Benedict Arnold, Hero Betrayed. It's very good and will explain to you the whole process of Benedict Arnold's thinking that got him to our story today. So Arnold is sending these letters down to John André and Henry Clinton, and the correspondence continues, and it becomes clear to them after some time that Arnold would like to switch sides, and that Arnold is also offering something key, something they need: access to the Hudson River. Now, if you saw my other videos about the battle for New York, you'd see that a huge part of the British plan for the Revolutionary War, all the way back in 1776, was to take the Hudson River. The Hudson River was a key strategic asset. It allowed access from the Atlantic Ocean through New York Harbor, north along the Hudson to Lake Champlain, and on to the St. Lawrence River and Britain's Canadian outposts. So this would connect their Canadian bases all the way down the Hudson to New York City, their command. This was something they've been trying to achieve since 1776. Lucky for us, the Americans took possession of the Hudson River very early on in the war and actually hung a series of chains across it. The most notable one was this one, which hung where the U.S. Military Academy at West Point is today. That's the narrowest part of the Hudson. They hung a chain across there, and they also sunk pointed logs into the water, making it too shallow for the deep-based British ships to get through. From that time on, we have controlled access to the Hudson River. So the British are very interested in General Arnold's offer of giving them the fort at West Point. They believe that if they can take that fort at West Point, open up the Hudson waterway, that the war will be over soon. Another reason for wanting the Hudson is it will cut off New England from the other colonies. So they also want the Hudson for that reason. And Arnold, who is the commander at West Point, is offering to give them everything they need to take the fort. The problem is Arnold wants a lot for that. He wants a huge sum of money. He wants to live in a nice home in New York City, and he also wants command of his own royalist regiment. André thinks that this is kind of steep, and he discusses it with his commander, General Clinton, and Clinton agrees it's worth it. So they decide yes. Now, Arnold, once he hears, yes, this is a go, says, okay, I'm only going to do this if you send an officer of equal value up here to meet with me, shake my hand, and guarantee it will happen. And the officer of equal value that Sir Henry chooses is Major André. This is the plan. André will board a ship called the Vulture. He'll travel north on the Hudson and dock. Arnold will meet him on the Vulture. They'll exchange information. Arnold will return to West Point, and André will return back to headquarters on the Vulture. Pretty simple plan. Before they depart, Sir Henry, General Clinton, gives Major André some instructions. He tells him, don't leave the ship. If Arnold doesn't show up, come back. Don't leave the ship. If Arnold tries to give you any papers, any documents, don't take them. Commit everything to memory. You're capable of doing this. Commit everything to memory. Don't take any papers. And don't take off your uniform at any time. Make sure you're always in uniform. So don't leave the ship. Don't accept any papers. Don't take off your uniform. Along with André and the rest of the crew, General Clinton sends Colonel Robertson, an older, more steadied officer. And he says he sent Colonel Robertson because he was not so emotionally invested in the project and would be able to be a better decision maker. He knows that Major André has a lot riding on this, we would say today. André is not a peer, right? He doesn't have a title. His family was not titled. If he can achieve this, he'll certainly be granted a title, probably at minimum a baronet. So this is a big move for André if he can pull this off. General Clinton knows this, so he's sending an older, more steady officer along to make sure André doesn't do anything foolish on the trip. So they head up north on the Vulture. The Vulture docks. This is September 20th. And Arnold doesn't show up. Instead of coming back, André writes General Clinton a letter, and he says, I've developed a stomach virus, stomach bug, stomach sickness, and I'm going to stay here a day until I'm feeling better. And stays another day. He stays another day, and the next day, he receives a message from Arnold saying that Arnold is going to send an escort for André to meet him elsewhere. Major André accepts the invitation. The escort arrives on September 21st, and André leaves with them. They take him to the home of Joshua Het Smith in Haverstraw. This is a print of what the house looked like, and this is the historical marker that's there today. And the historical marker is at the repair shop for a car dealership, so it's kind of strange being there, but this is where the house was, where they met. So they met at Smith's house, and they're going over all of the information paperwork, and the sun sets, gets dark. And they decide to spend the night there and continue speaking the following day. Now, incredibly, while they're meeting, the Vulture, the ship, comes under fire from American forces, and it leaves, leaving André there with no, we would say, ride home. So they finish up their talking. Now it's September 22nd, and Arnold prepares to leave. And he tells André, you're going to have to go back to New York on horseback. He writes him a pass because Arnold, you know, is the commander of that region of the Hudson Valley. So he writes Andre a pass, and he uses their code name, John Anderson. And the pass says, the bearer of this pass is one John Anderson. He is a merchant with whom I often do business. Please let him pass safely. And he gives that to him to use to travel. He also tells him, you need to take off your uniform. You have to travel in civilian clothes. You can't travel in that uniform. And he puts on some clothes belonging to Smith's brother. He also gives him all kinds of paperwork. And among the information in that paperwork is this. Now, this is such an incredible list of information that I'm going to have to read it to you because I can't commit it all to memory. So among the information that Arnold gives Andre is the estimate of West Point forces, and that is 3,086 men. The estimate of the number of men needed to man the works without artillery, 2,438. Artillery orders showing the placement of all artillery, how many ordnance is in forts, batteries, etc., about 100 pieces, a copy of the statement of condition of the troops submitted by Washington to Congress, and remarks on the works at West Point that Arnold has sent to Washington. And there's still more. I have to turn the page. Also included there is a description of the 4 forts, how they are built, the size and the placements, descriptions of 6 readouts, the guns and the men, all in Arnold's handwriting and drawing, right? So he lists it out, he draws everything out for him, and Andre accepts all of this. Arnold leaves, he tells Andre, you really should travel on the other side of the Hudson. So right, Haverstraw is not far from Tappan, so they start out on the west side of the Hudson. They're going to take a ferry across, and they're going to head south on the east side of the Hudson. Arnold returns back to West Point, and Mr. Smith offers to guide Major André for part of the way. So they leave, they take a ferry across the Hudson, and they begin traveling south along the Hudson to New York City. They spend the night, and now Andre is traveling alone on September 23rd. He's traveling along down the road, and here is some video that I took not far from the path that Andre would have been taking. Today, that path is a major street, so I moved a little bit closer to the Hudson and took this video to kind of give you an idea of what it might have looked like when Andre was making this journey himself. And he hits a town called Tarrytown, which is Westchester County. Andre at Tarrytown gets stopped by 3 men. So just for the record, the 3 men are John Paulding, Isaac Van Wart, and David Williams. They stop Andre, and there's a little bit of confusion and back and forth between them over who's on which side. Kind of an odd conversation. Are you part of the lower faction, meaning New York City, a loyalist, or the upper faction, meaning the Hudson Valley and a patriot? They kind of go back and forth, and they make Andre think he's a loyalist. So when Andre reveals who he is, they say, aha, we got you, we're really patriots. But the story Andre tells is that they stopped him because they were attracted to his expensive boots. He's still wearing his boots, and he has a few other items that are personal items that are very expensive. And he says they went back and forth with each other. And when they found out who he was, he offered them a ransom if they would escort him back to Sir Henry Clinton, and that Clinton would offer them a great payment for his safe return. Andre later said that they agreed to this initially, but then after they saw the papers he had and some other things, they decided to hand him over to the American side. So they hand him over to Colonel Jameson of the 2nd Continental Light Dragoons. Andre is still using his secret name, John Anderson. He says, my name is John Anderson. I'm a merchant from New York, and I've been doing business with General Arnold. This is the pass he gave me with which to travel. And Jameson's kind of confused. Now, the guys at the time said Jameson was a nice guy and a decent commander, but not the smartest guy. And he's kind of confused, like, why does this guy doing business with Andre have these personal papers from Benedict Arnold? This all looks strange to me. So he decides to send Andre back to Benedict Arnold with a letter he writes. Look, I got this guy, John Anderson. I don't know who he is or what his relationship to you is, but I'm sending him back to you. So he has some soldiers begin escorting Andre back to Arnold. In the meantime, he takes the papers he found on Andre and he packages them up with another messenger to take them to Washington with a letter to Washington. I caught this guy, John Anderson. He had this stuff from Arnold. I don't know what's going on. This is what he had. So these two separate messengers take off on their various missions. In the meantime, Major Benjamin Talmadge arrives in the camp. Talmadge is a part of the 2nd Continental Light Dragoons, and you might know is the founder of the Culper spy ring, and he was a very popular character on the TV show Turn. So Benjamin Talmadge comes into the camp, and Jameson tells him what just transpired with this John Anderson guy. And Talmadge, like all of his alarm bells start going off because he remembers Arnold telling him, if you ever come across a Mr. John Anderson, please let him pass, as I regularly do business with him. But now he hears that this John Anderson had all of this paperwork revealing everything there is to know about West Point. And he said later in his memoir, he said that at that point he knew Arnold was a traitor. And he asked his commander, Jameson, to allow him to take a group of men to West Point and arrest Arnold. And Jameson refused to let him do it. He said he told Jameson, look, I'll bear all responsibility. I'll absolve you. I'll say you didn't know anything about it if you'll just let me do it. And Jameson said no. Talmadge later in life said it was one of his biggest regrets that he didn't disobey that order. So now they're all kind of waiting in the camp. And in the meantime, Talmadge does get Jameson to get Anderson back to the camp. So they send somebody out. They bring back John Anderson, Major André. And Talmadge said when he looked at him, he knew immediately by his carriage, by his hair, by the way he turned on his heel and the way he paced, that this man, he said, was born to arms. This is a phrase meaning he was a British aristocrat, an educated man, an officer, and a gentleman. So this is interesting. Who now is John Anderson? Well, Jameson hands John Anderson over to yet another American officer in a different camp, a Lieutenant King. And King, right away, just like Talmadge is kind of onto this, he says, look, this is a wealthy, proper man who is very uncomfortable with his appearance. So he offers to have him bathed, shaved, have his hair fixed, and give him clean clothes. She does. Now, Lieutenant King and John Anderson go for a walk in the garden, and John Anderson spills the beans about who he really is, that he is Major John André, Adjutant General to Sir Henry Clinton, and he says, may I please have a pen and paper to write to Commander Washington? And he does. And as I talk, I'll show you the 4 pages of that letter. You can find them online. I think I downloaded them from Library of Congress. And note the excellent penmanship of Major André. So Major André writes to General Washington. He tells him who he is, what his position is, and he says he was meeting with General Arnold under a flag of truce offered by Arnold. This flag of truce thing is going to become very important in our story. He says, meeting under a flag of truce offered by General Arnold. He then tells him pretty much what transpired, and he said, I know you will understand, as I was only doing what a good officer under your command would do in the same situation. In other words, I know you'll understand because your guys are out there trying to do the same thing to our guys. And so that letter goes off to General Washington. And now a whole lot of things are in motion here. So the story seems to get a little bit complicated. Now, the way the 3 guys who caught André found the papers that he was carrying was they stole his boots. So when they stole his boots, they found the papers. They also stole his watch, and they stole his horse. So I don't know if they're heroes. You can decide. This is a controversial thing. I've disagreed with people over this for years. So now a whole sequence of complex events are going to take place as these messages go back and forth. I'm going to try to simplify what's going on as best I can because it really is hard to follow. Let's go back to General Arnold. General Arnold is at West Point. He's actually at a home near West Point, which is serving as his headquarters. And he's having breakfast with his wife and some of Washington's officers. Washington is on his way to inspect West Point. And like this forward guard is there. And they're having breakfast with Mr. and Mrs. Arnold. Some of you might know that Mrs. Arnold is the former Margaret Shippen or Peggy Shippen of Philadelphia, and this is a sketch that André drew of her in 1777, 1778 when he was stationed in Philadelphia. So it's a very famous drawing of her by John André. So they're having breakfast, and the letter from Jameson to Arnold arrives. Arnold reads the letter and he leaves the room. Mrs. Arnold follows him and he tells her, I have been found out. I'm leaving. I'm going now. Meet me in New York City. And Arnold is out of there, leaving her with these officers. In the meantime, Washington arrives with the rest of his officers, and Jameson's letter to Washington finally gets to Washington. He sees the story. I have this John Anderson. He was carrying all these papers from Benedict Arnold. Arnold is gone. Arnold's already out of there. And Washington realizes what just happened. And they said that he turned to, I think it was Lafayette, Knox, and Hamilton, or it might have been Lafayette, Greene, and Hamilton. And he said to them, whom can we trust now? In other words, if even Arnold would do this to us, imagine what others would do. So this is a really awful moment for General Washington. Arnold is out of there. Arnold makes his way back down to New York City. Now, the next thing that happens is Mrs. Arnold puts on an Academy Award winning performance. Now, I'm not going to get into whether or not Mrs. Arnold knew what was going on. There's a lot of historical fiction that claims she was the mastermind of all this. There are some historians who believe she was in on it, but I can't find any actual evidence that she participated in this as an active player at all, other than just being his wife and having to deal with all of the circumstances. So Mrs. Arnold goes up to her room, gets in bed, messes up her hair, messes up her face and makeup, starts crying and screaming. And when Washington, the officers enter the room, she's pulling out her hair. She has her baby with her, and she's screaming, they're trying to kill my child. They're trying to kill my child, and just acts totally insane. Whether or not these officers believe she's genuine really isn't the point. The point is they're not going to blame a woman for any of this, and they release her, and Washington provides for safe passage for her and her baby back to New York City where they can rejoin Arnold. Now, next, what to do next? Well, when Washington gets news that they have John André, he asks Talmadge to bring André to West Point to him. Now, I'm just going to say that for the rest of the story, Washington is never going to speak to Major André, nor will he ever be in the same room with him. And this begins a whole bunch of back and forth across the Hudson River that's going to go on over the next couple of days until everybody reaches their destination, where we started our story, the town of Tappan. So Washington sends word to General Greene to prepare the headquarters at Tappan and to also call a number of other officers to sit in a military trial of Major André. He instructs Talmadge to always travel with André under strong guard because, of course, they expect that Sir Henry might send someone to rescue him, and the person they most expect they'll send is Major John Simcoe, at that time André's good friend. He also instructs Talmadge to make sure Major André is treated well and that he's kept in a place that's nice. So they travel by barge now back across the Hudson to the side where Tappan is and begin their journey to Tappan. From this point on, Talmadge and André will be almost constant companions, and Talmadge really is the only person who later in life tells the complete story of what happened here. And he said that as they were traveling on a barge on the Hudson, he started talking to André, asking him what he knew about the fort at West Point, and he said he was shocked that André knew even more about it than he knew himself. And he said he began to realize just what kind of danger they had so closely avoided, that had, this mishap not have happened and André got back to headquarters, the horror that would have befell them all. He also said, though, that on the journey, they spoke about a lot of different things. André was 29. Talmadge was 26. They're both very well-educated men. I mentioned André was educated in Switzerland. Talmadge went to Yale. It's very educated, so very well-educated young men. gentlemen, and they spoke about all kinds of topics. Talmadge said they talked about science. He said the sad situation our countries have found ourselves in. And he said that in any other circumstances, they would have been like brothers. They had so much in common. But that at one point in their journey, Major André asked Major Talmadge, "What do you think will happen to me?" And that Major Talmadge responded to him, "Well, you know the story of my good friend and brother from Yale, Nathan Hale." And Andre responded, "Of course, I know about the story of Captain Hale, but I was in a prison camp at that time." He was in a prison camp in Lancaster in 1776. He says, "I was in a prison camp at that time and I had nothing to do with it. It didn't have anything to do with me." And Talmadge said, he replied to him, "Why, sir, your circumstances are the same, and I believe you will meet the same fate." And he said this was the first time he saw Andre grow very uncomfortable and appear to be frightened. Well, as they approached Tappan, he said he could see that Andre was still quite concerned about his appearance, and he loaned him his cape, his cloak, to put over him so he wouldn't see kind of the shabby clothes he was wearing. And they took him to what today is the 76 House on Main Street. Some of you have probably been there. It's a nice restaurant. If you haven't been there and you're in the area, go. It really is a good place to eat. And at that time, it was known as Maybe's Tavern. So they set up accommodations for Andre there. Not far, about a little less than a mile away up the road, is the DeWint House, which is still there today. You can visit that as well. And that served as Washington's headquarters. Washington had all of Andre's meals prepared there and sent to him. So Andre writes to Sir Henry Clinton, tells him about his predicament, asks for a uniform, and Sir Clinton sends him a uniform. He also starts preparing for this trial. Well, in the meantime, letters are going to go back and forth between Clinton and Washington, right? Remember I told you about that flag of truce? Clinton will write to Washington and say, "You cannot hold Major Andre or place him on trial for anything, as he was traveling under a flag of truce offered by your general, and under the law of flags, he needs to be returned to me. He was traveling legally." And they kind of go back and forth in this. And there's kind of an idea from Washington to Clinton that, well, I don't really have any interest in Andre. I don't want him. I'll give him back to you. Just give me Arnold. Fair exchange, Arnold for Andre. People in New York City close to Sir Henry, who saw him in Rivington's coffee house where he had a private table, said that Clinton really agonized over this decision and that he ultimately said, "Andre is worth 10 Arnolds to me. But if I give you Arnold, no one will ever turn again." And he decides to leave Andre to his fate. In the meantime, Andre has a trial right across the street from the 76 House, where the Dutch church is today. This is the old Dutch church that's there today. There was a previous church in this location for the trial. And sitting in trial of Major Andre, again, I'm going to have to read the names because I can't remember them all. So let me get my notes. Making the decision of whether or not Major Andre was a spy or was acting as an officer under a flag of truce will be Major Generals Greene, Sterling, St. Clair, Lafayette, Howe, and Steuben. Brigadier Generals Parsons, Clinton, Knox, Glover, Patterson, Hand, Huntington, and Stark. And I'll just note here that Henry Knox does know John André. When André was captured in Canada and sent to the prison camp in Lancaster, he was escorted part of the way by General Henry Knox. So Knox knows André. Washington calls together his seasoned commanders to sit in judgment of André. He does this because he knows André is smart, he's charismatic, and people like him. And he wants to make sure that his generals will be fair in giving André his time in court. Accusing André will be the first Judge Advocate General of the military, JAG. His name is John Lawrence. Not Lawrence, the guy you know is friends with Hamilton, but Lawrence, John Lawrence. André is allowed to defend himself. He's allowed to make statements, and he is also allowed to refuse to answer any questions he deems improper. Washington is not a part of this trial. He's not there. He's down the road in his headquarters at the DeWitt House. And at the end of the trial, they find him guilty of espionage and sentence him to death. This is September 19th, 1780. And I'd just like to read you a quote from General Lafayette over why he believes the generals were so hard on André. Lafayette says, "The court was impelled not only by rules of war, but by the British Army itself in the execution of Captain Hale for a similar offense." So remember my video about invasion, occupation, and the Battle of Kips Bay, and the way that young captain from Connecticut, Captain Nathan Hale, was captured and hanged as a spy by General Howe, his body left hanging for 3 days and thrown in an unmarked grave. Well, Lafayette tells us that although they may have liked André and felt favorably toward him, they were still so angry over the treatment of Captain Hale that surely affected their decision. Also at the trial is Colonel Alexander Hamilton, who Lafayette said did everything he could think of to prevent André from being executed. Hamilton wrote a letter some point after the trial to his fiancée, Miss Elizabeth Schuyler. Miss Schuyler had met André in the past as well. Again, when he was being moved from Canada to Pennsylvania, he stayed in her home as her father, General Schuyler, was also part of the group escorting those prisoners. So she had actually met him in the past. And Hamilton wrote to her later about the trial and about how hard he worked to try to prevent André from going to his death. He also said that André to him was everything a man ought to be: handsome, well carried, good manners, an officer and a gentleman. And in the letter, he also mentions to Miss Schuyler that he knows he falls far short of André and all of those things, but hopes she will still love him in spite of it. It was a nice letter that he writes to her. So André gets news of his pending execution. The execution date set is October 1st, and there's still some more things going on in the background here. André writes a letter to General Clinton. He tells him he's been found guilty and sentenced to death. Asks that he'll please send a servant to help him dress, a proper uniform for the occasion, and will he please take care of André's family. André has a younger brother who's serving elsewhere in the military, and he has 2 sisters and a mother remaining in England, and he asks Sir Henry to please take care of them. He also thanks General Clinton for being like a father to him and caring so much for him over the years and taking care of him. So nice letter he writes to Sir Henry to prepare for his death. In the meantime, of course, it's a complicated story. There's something else going on. General Washington calls Major Aaron Ogden from New Jersey to his headquarters at the DeWitt House. And he says, "I want you to get together some number of well-armed, trustworthy men to take this package to General Clinton in the hopes that he'll read what I have to say and he'll release General Arnold in exchange for André." So this now is going to hold up André's execution as they do this. He said, "Before you go visit General Lafayette. He has some other things to add." So Major Ogden goes to General Lafayette. General Lafayette says, "Yes, I would like you to take this man with you." He's a sergeant. "And also, I will be bringing my regiments down to New Jersey to wait for you. In the event that Sir Henry releases General Arnold, I will escort him back up to Tappan." And he instructs him, of course, to go down the side of the Hudson, that they're on the west side of the Hudson, to go down to the British camp opposite Manhattan, present his credentials, and he'll be escorted to see General Clinton. So Major Ogden heads down to New Jersey, shows his documents. They escort him into New York City. General Clinton will not meet with him, but his assistants do. And of course, they're not going to release Arnold. And he gets to stay the night. They give him a nice dinner. They give him a place to stay. He stays the night. And the next morning, he returns to New Jersey empty-handed. But he finds out that that sergeant has defected to the other side. Well, that's kind of weird, because we know now that that sergeant didn't really defect to the other side. He was a plant from Washington and Lafayette to get into New York City and spy on Arnold. So that whole operation was just a cover to get their man into New York City. Pretty great, wasn't it? It was a pretty good move on their part. So Sir Henry is going to send a couple guys up now to meet with a delegation from Washington. They're still going back and forth over Major André. And they're going to meet with General Greene at a place called Stony Point. And that meeting goes nowhere when the British offer a letter from Benedict Arnold claiming full responsibility for everything that happened. And General Greene apparently was so disgusted that Arnold wouldn't offer himself, but sends a letter saying, oh yeah, I did it, that he threw the letter on the floor and walked out. And that seals Major André's fate. So on October 2nd, 1780, the door of today's 76th house opened at 11 a.m. and out stepped Major John André, escorted by American soldiers. This beautiful painting by Don Troiani brilliantly captures the moment. And I'm just going to take a little credit for this painting here and say that one of my private clients took my John André tour of Tappan, and they were so moved by the story of André's execution that they commissioned this painting for their home. So beautiful painting capturing that moment. I used to stand there all the time and wonder what it was like to see the door open and Major André exit on the way to his execution. Now, one of the Americans that were sitting with him inside the jail said that André, as composed as he seemed, looked like his skin had, insects underneath it. His skin was literally crawling. André also yelled at his servant, who began crying, and he yelled at him and told him to stop and to remove himself from his presence until he could gather himself. This also is a sketch that André did of himself in the jail. So André is going to be escorted through Tappan up the hill behind where the 76th house is, and Major Talmadge will be with him. And he says that along the way, they turn the corner and André is expecting a firing squad. Officers were entitled to death by firing squad, but when they turn the corner, he sees a gallows. And Talmadge said at that point, André stumbled and began to lose his composure. He said that André steadied himself on Talmadge's arm, and he looked at him and he said, oh, how cruel my fate, yet it will be brief. And that Talmadge escorted him. Now, the way they did this was they had a cart, right? The person stood on the cart. They would put the noose around their neck and move the cart out. They asked André if he wanted to speak. He did. He gave his last words. He thanked everyone for treating him so well and so fairly. He got up on the cart, I should say, tied his own blindfold, put his hands behind his back to be tied. They put the noose over his head, and André was hanged. Talmadge said that when André dropped to the end of the rope, that he felt that his own knees were going to buckle beneath him and that he would fall to the ground. At that time, a number of American officers openly wept at the death of André. Now, instead of leaving him hanging for 3 days, the way the British did to Captain Hale, he was cut down, buried with full honors here in the spot you see here, where this monument marks the place he was originally buried, because later his remains were returned to England, where they rest today at Westminster Abbey. That is the sad story of the death of Major André. So that, my friends, is the incident that occurred in Tappan, New York, the end of September, early October, 1780, the execution of Major John André. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. So until next time, I'm Mrs. Q. That behind me is my dog, Quintus.